The dining room of the Aldercroft estate went quiet, the way expensive rooms go quiet. Not from silence, but from the particular stillness of people deciding whether to look. Vera Aldercroft set down her wineglass with the precision of a woman who had practiced the gesture her entire life. 300 acres of Virginia horse country stretched beyond the windows behind her, lit gold in the October evening, and she did not glance at it once. She was looking at Declan Marsh. "My son's widow," she said, loud enough for the table to carry it, "has spent the last 4 years auditioning replacements. I'd hoped she had better taste than this." Declan did not answer. He was standing near the far end of the sideboard where the caterers had set the overflow bar, in a jacket that did not belong to the occasion, shoes that had real walk grip. He had been hired 3 weeks ago to assess the structural failure in the east wing of the main house. He had not expected to still be in the building at 7 in the evening. He had not expected Vera Aldercroft to say what she just said in front of 14 people who would remember it. Across the table, Lena set her fork down. She did it quietly. The way she did most things. She did not look at her mother-in-law. She did not look at Declan. She looked at the candle in front of her and let it burn. In Declan's jacket pocket was a folded letter from a real estate attorney in Richmond, unopened. He had been carrying it for 9 days. Vera smiled at her own remark. She did not know what she had just started. September had come to the Shenandoah Valley the way it always did, unhurried and particular, with mornings that smelled of cut grass and evenings that turned cold before you expected them to. Lena had driven the 2 hours from Richmond with the windows down and Ivy asleep in the back seat, the child's sneaker resting against the door panel and a library book open face down on her lap. The Aldercroft estate sat 11 miles west of Waynesboro on a private road that the county map still listed as Aldercroft Lane, though no one in the family had updated the signage since 1987. The main house was federal style, 1831, with a center hall and 2 flanking wings, the east of which had developed a slow but serious problem with its foundation sill plate sometime in the late 1990s that 3 previous contractors had patched without solving. Lena had hired Declan Marsh on a Tuesday. She had found him through a preservation architect in Charlottesville who had called him, without elaboration, the most careful man she had ever watched read a building. He arrived on a Wednesday morning in a truck that had seen real miles. He was 41. He shook Lena's hand at the front door, looked briefly at the roofline before looking at her, and said only that he'd like to start in the crawl space if that was all right. It was all right. Ivy had been watching from the top porch step, 6 years old and specific in her observations. She told her mother afterward that the man had a good flashlight and that he'd said good morning to her before he'd said it to anyone else. Lena had noted that too. The structural assessment took 4 days. On the 5th morning, Declan spread the drawings across the kitchen table of the cottage. Lena had given him use of the old caretaker's place 200 yards east of the main house, and wrote out his findings in a single handwritten document. He had the kind of handwriting that took its time. The east wing sill had been failing at the northeast corner for longer than anyone had admitted. The prior repairs had been cosmetic. Load transfer had shifted to 2 interior posts that were not designed for it. Before any finish work resumed, the foundation would need to be underpinned, the sill replaced in full, and the posts sistered with new lumber of the correct grade. He left the document on Lena's desk in the estate office at 7:40 in the morning before she arrived. She read it at 8:15. She read it again at 8:30. She had been told by 2 previous contractors that the problem was manageable. She had suspected they were wrong. The document used the word manageable once in a sentence, explaining what it did not mean. She walked to the cottage at 9 and knocked. Declan answered, in a work shirt with the sleeves pushed up. She said, "How long have you known it was this bad?" He said, "Since Thursday." She said, "Why didn't you tell me Thursday?" He said, "I wanted to be certain before I told you something you couldn't unknow." Lena stood in the cottage doorway for a moment. Then she said, She'd like to see the corner in question. He got his flashlight. They went. The estate had been in the Aldercroft family since Vera's husband's grandfather had purchased it in 1931. Vera had married into it at 24 and had spent the subsequent 47 years becoming more synonymous with it than any Aldercroft by blood. When her son Thomas died of a heart attack at 39, 2 days after Ivy's first birthday, Vera had grieved in the way of women who express grief as territory. She tightened. She consolidated. She began referring to the estate in the first-person singular. Lena had been married to Thomas for 6 years. She had loved him in the particular way you love someone who is fundamentally good and fundamentally limited, and she had not stopped. She had also not stopped running the foundation that Thomas had established in his 3rd year of sobriety, the Aldercroft Family Foundation, which funded recovery programs across the Shenandoah Valley and which had been, quietly, the most functional thing the family name had touched in 30 years. Vera had never forgiven Lena for being competent at it. Declan worked through the month of September without drawing attention to himself, which was his usual condition. He had a crew of 4 men he had worked with long enough that they communicated mostly in gestures and the occasional short sentence. The underpinning work began in the 2nd week. It was slow. It was correct. Ivy found him on a Saturday morning when the crew had the day off. She came around the east wing corner with a composition notebook and a look of purpose. She told him she was drawing the house. He said that seemed like good use of a Saturday. She sat on an overturned bucket near his toolbox and drew for 40 minutes while he worked on the window casing above her. She did not ask many questions. She did ask, at one point, whether houses could be sad. Declan thought about it before answering, which she seemed to appreciate. He said he thought houses mostly just held what people put in them. He said some held a lot. Ivy considered this. Then she said her house held a lot of her dad. He stopped what he was doing for a moment. Then he went back to the casing she kept drawing. Lena found them like that when she came around the corner at noon with 2 sandwiches and a juice box. She stopped at the edge of the path. She stood there long enough that neither of them noticed her, and she had time to watch the 2 of them, existing in the same easy quiet, without effort or performance. She thought of Thomas, which she did often, and then she thought of something else, which she did less often, and she filed both thoughts away in the part of her mind she kept tidy and closed. She came forward with the sandwiches. Declan looked up. He had the kind of face that registered things before it decided what to do about them. He said, "Thank you." Ivy said, "Can I have the pickle?" Lena gave her the pickle. Vera Aldercroft arrived from Richmond on the first Friday of October for what she called her seasonal review of the property, which was what she had called her quarterly assertion of relevance since Thomas died. She did not call ahead. She rarely did. She walked through the east wing with her reading glasses on and her hands clasped behind her back, and she asked Declan 3 questions in the manner of someone who had already decided the answers. He gave her the correct answers anyway, briefly, without adjustment. That evening, Vera sat with Lena in the formal dining room with the good china out, which meant Vera had decided something and wanted architecture around her when she said it. She said she had been speaking with the Aldercroft family attorney about the estate management structure. She said it had been 4 years and certain arrangements needed to be formalized. She said the foundation board would benefit from additional experienced oversight, meaning Vera's oversight, meaning Vera on the board in a voting capacity she did not currently hold. Lena said she would think about it. Vera said there was not much to think about. Lena said she understood that was how Vera saw it. Vera picked up her wine glass. She said, "You've always been better at managing Thomas's memory than managing anything that actually belongs to this family." Lena looked at the candle. She did not respond. She had learned not to respond to sentences that were designed to land and not to be answered. Outside, in the cottage 200 yards east, Declan was at the table with a pencil and the structural drawings, working late on a detail that had been bothering him since Thursday. He did not know what was being said in the main house. He would have recognized the architecture of it had he known. He had heard similar sentences in a different house, in a different year, directed at someone he had not been able to protect. The October dinner party was Vera's idea, which meant it was not optional. 14 guests, the mayor of Waynesboro, 2 members of the County Preservation Board, 3 of the foundation's largest donors, and various Aldercroft adjacents who had been donors once and needed to be reminded of it. Lena organized it because organizing things was what she did. She did it well, and she did not enjoy it. Declan had been pulled into the evening by practical necessity. A temporary lighting installation in the formal rooms had been added to the project scope at Vera's request, and the estate manager had asked him to remain on site through the dinner in case of issues with the dimmer panel. He wore his own jacket. It was clean. It was not the right jacket for the room, and he did not particularly care. He knew Vera had been watching him for 2 weeks. He had noticed it the way you notice weather, not with alarm, but with the recognition that it was a condition you were operating inside of. He had not told Lena. There was nothing to tell yet. At 8:14, Vera raised her glass. The room did as expensive rooms do, and she said what she said. Declan did not move. In his pocket, the letter from the Richmond attorney sat folded, still unopened, exactly as it had been for 9 days. Lena set her fork down, ouched. The candle burned. 2 days. After the dinner, Vera appeared at the door of the estate office, where Lena was working through the foundation's quarterly grant reports. She had an envelope in her hand. She set it on the desk. It was not sealed. Inside was a 2-paragraph letter from a law firm in Charlottesville. Vera, it explained, intended to petition the court for co-trustee status over the Aldercroft Family Foundation on the grounds that the current sole trustee, Lena, had demonstrated, in Vera's written assessment, a pattern of unilateral decision-making inconsistent with the family's philanthropic legacy. Lena read it once. She set it flat on the desk. Vera said, "You've done good work with it. That's not in question. But a foundation of this size, carrying the Aldercroft name, cannot be managed as a personal project." Lena said, "Thomas named me sole trustee." Vera said, "Thomas was 37 when he did that. He did not anticipate." She stopped. Lena said, "What did he not anticipate?" Vera did not finish the sentence. She picked up the envelope and walked out. Lena sat at the desk for a long time afterward, through the window. She could see the east wing, the new lumber, visible at the foundation corner where Declan's crew had been working. Clean and solid. Where the rot had been. She thought about Thomas sitting in this chair in the 2nd year of his sobriety, writing out the trust documents by hand before the attorney formatted them, saying he wanted something that outlasted the mess, saying he wanted her to carry it because she was the only person he trusted to carry it without turning it into a monument. She picked up her phone. She did not call her own attorney. She drove to the cottage. Declan answered the door before she knocked. He had seen the car. He did not ask. He stepped back and let her in. He put a kettle on and sat across the table and waited. She told him about the letter, not all of it. Enough. He listened the way he read buildings, without interruption, without rushing to the structural problem before he understood the whole. When she finished, he didn't say anything for a moment. He poured the tea. Then he said, "Is the trust document solid?" She said, "Thomas wrote it to be." He said, "Then it's solid." She looked at him across the table. She said, "You're a contractor." "Why does that sound like legal counsel?" He said, "I've read a lot of documents in the last few years." She let it pass. She picked up her tea. They sat in the cottage kitchen while the evening came down over the valley, and neither of them said anything more important than that, and it was enough. She did not ask about the letter in his jacket pocket. She had noticed it at the dinner. She had decided not to ask. 3 days later, a man named Whitfield came to the estate. He arrived in a gray sedan, unannounced, and asked for Declan at the cottage door. Declan stepped outside. They spoke for 11 minutes in the gravel drive. Ivy was at school. Lena was in Richmond for a foundation meeting. The estate was quiet. The man from Richmond handed Declan a new envelope, this one sealed, and told him the paperwork was ready when he was. Declan held it without opening it. He said he needed until the end of the week. The man said, "Of course." and drove out the way he had come. Declan stood in the gravel for a while after the car was gone. He thought about a woman named June, which was something he did when he needed to think clearly, because she had been the clearest person he had ever known. He thought about the conversation they'd had in the hospital in March of 2021, 7 weeks before she died, when she had been specific in the way dying people sometimes are. She had told him 3 things. The third one had taken him 2 years to understand and another year to act on. He went back inside. He opened the sealed envelope and read it at the table. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in the inside pocket of his work jacket beside the other one and went back to the East Wing. The November board meeting of the Aldercroft Family Foundation was held in Richmond at the offices of the foundation's law firm, as it always was. 5 board members, Lena as sole trustee, the foundation's executive director, a woman named Patrice, who had been running the grants program since the 2nd year, and who was, by any reasonable measure, the operational heart of the thing. Vera attended as a guest, by Lena's invitation, which Lena had extended because not extending it would have become its own kind of conflict. Agenda Item 4 was a proposed grant cycle expansion into 2 new Virginia counties. Lena had prepared the analysis. Patrice had prepared the implementation framework. The board had the documents for 2 weeks. The vote was 4-1 in favor. Vera, as a guest without voting rights, said nothing during the vote. After the meeting concluded, she caught Lena in the hallway. She said, "You've built something impressive. I want you to understand that I don't intend to dismantle it. I intend to protect it," Lena said. "From what?" Vera said. "From the instability of a single point of control." Lena said. "You mean from me?" Vera did not answer. Lena drove back to the estate that evening in the particular silence of a woman who has been patient for a long time and has begun to feel the cost of it. She parked at the main house and sat in the car for 3 minutes before she got out. The light was on in the cottage. She did not go to the cottage that night. She went to bed and lay awake, listening to the house, which was the thing she did when she could not arrive at the decision she needed. The house held a lot. Ivy had said it. She was right. It held Thomas in the formal dining room where he had announced his sobriety to a table of people who hadn't believed him yet. It held her in the estate office where she had spent 4 years building something he had trusted her to build. It held Vera in the way a house holds weather, not warmly, but definitively. She fell asleep with the window open and the Virginia cold coming in at the edge of the curtain. In the morning she made Ivy breakfast, put her on the school bus, and drove to the cottage. Declan was outside with a level and a notepad checking the East Wing corner in the early light. He saw her car. He finished the measurement he was taking and wrote it down before he turned. She said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to just listen." He put the notepad in his pocket. He listened. She told him about Vera's petition. She told him about the Charlottesville law firm. She told him that Thomas had spent the last 6 months of his life rewriting the trust to make it unassailable, because he had known, in the way people who have lived inside a family long enough know things, that Vera would eventually try to reclaim it. She told him she was not afraid of the petition. She told him she was tired. He did not offer comfort. He did not say it would be fine. He stood in the morning light and let her be tired out loud, which was the thing she had needed for longer than she could account for. When she finished, he said, "I need to tell you something too." She looked at him. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out 2 folded envelopes. He set them on top of the level, on the sawhorse between them. He did not open them. He said, "My wife's name was June Aldercroft. She was Thomas's first cousin. She was raised in this house until she was 12, when her branch of the family moved to Richmond. She came back twice a year until she and Thomas had the falling out. The one about the foundation governance in 2017. You may not know that story." Lena was very still. He said, "She left. She went to Richmond. She built a career in nonprofit law. We met in 2018. We were married in 2019. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2020. He stopped. She died in April of 2021. Lena said, "I didn't know Thomas had a cousin named June." He said, "Vera made certain of that." The morning was quiet. A horse moved in the far pasture. Somewhere in the tree line, a bird started and stopped. He said, "In the last month of her life, June retained a Richmond attorney. She had spent the previous 8 months, in between treatments, quietly acquiring shares in the holding company that Vera had structured around the estate assets. The one she created after Thomas died to consolidate control. June knew the structure. She had helped design the original version years earlier before the falling out." Lena looked at the 2 envelopes on the sawhorse. He said, "She bought them through a series of accounts I established at her direction. At the time of her death, she held enough of the holding company's voting interest to effectively block any structural change Vera attempted. She transferred that interest to me by testamentary trust. The transfer vested in full 14 months ago." He picked up the first envelope. He opened it. He set the document on the sawhorse beside the level. He said, "June did not ask me to take the estate. She did not ask me to take anything from Vera. She asked me to come here. She asked me to find the people who were still building what she believed in, and to make sure they were protected." He picked up the second envelope. He did not open it yet. He said, "She told me her cousin Thomas had married someone who would carry it right. She said I would know her when I met her. She said to give her time before I said anything, because she would need to show me who she was before she would need to know who I was." Lena's eyes did not move from his face. "She was right," he said, "about all of it." He set the second envelope down, unopened between them. He picked up the level. He went back to work. Lena stood at the edge of the east wing in the morning light for a long time. She looked at the envelope. She looked at the clean new lumber at the foundation corner, solid where the rot had been. She picked up the envelope. She did not open it. She put it in the pocket of her coat and walked back to the main house. The Aldercroft Estate Holding Company Board met on the 3rd Thursday of November. 4 voting members. Vera held the chairmanship by written consent of the other 3. All Aldercroft adjacents she had appointed in 2021 when she structured the entity. Declan walked in at 5 minutes to 10. He wore the suit he had worn once before, in Richmond, at June's service. He had not worn it since. It still fit. He sat at the end of the table. No one spoke for a moment. Vera said, "Mr. Marsh, what are you doing here?" He said, "I'm here as a voting member." He set the documents on the table. The Richmond attorney had sent copies to Vera's counsel the previous afternoon. Vera had read them at 11 o'clock at night in her Richmond apartment, with the particular stillness of a woman who has just understood that she has been on the wrong side of something for longer than she can afford to calculate. She had called the Aldercroft attorney at 11:15. He had confirmed it. She had sat with it overnight. She was still sitting with it now. Declan spoke quietly as he did most things. He said that under the terms of June Aldercroft Marsh's testamentary trust, voting interest sufficient to constitute a blocking position had vested in him 14 months prior. He had not exercised it. He was exercising it now. He said that the petition against Lena's sole trusteeship of the Aldercroft Family Foundation was, as of this morning, formally opposed. It would not succeed. He said that any future restructuring of the foundation that did not have Lena's consent would be similarly opposed. He said one more thing. He said, "June asked me to keep what Thomas built standing. She said the foundation was the best of him. She said she wanted it to outlive the people who had made it harder than it needed to be." He paused. "I'm honoring that." Vera sat at the head of the table. She did not stand. She did not speak. She looked at the document in front of her with the face of a woman, reviewing a thing she had been certain could not exist. After a moment, she rose. She walked out. The 3 remaining board members looked at each other, and then at Declan, and then at the documents, in the order that people look at things when the room has shifted and they are deciding what it means. Lena was in the estate office when the call came from the Richmond attorney. She listened. She thanked him. She set the phone down on the desk. She sat there for a long time. Outside the window, the east wing was done. The new sill plate ran clean across the foundation corner. Properly sistered, properly supported, carrying the load it was built to carry. The scaffolding had come down Monday. The crew had gone. Declan was still on the property. He had said there were details. She had not pushed. She thought about June, whom she had never met, who had known Thomas in the years before she did, who had built something careful and patient from a sickbed, and then sent someone to finish it. She thought about Ivy, who had told a man with a good flashlight that her house held a lot of her dad. She thought about the envelope, which she had opened that night in the kitchen alone, after Ivy was asleep, which she had read once and put down and then read again, which had told her, in the dry language of trust documents and voting rights and testamentary transfer, that someone she had never known had seen her clearly enough to act. She picked up her coat and walked outside. Declan was in the back garden behind the east wing, doing the last of the finish work on a window casing that had not closed right since the previous repair. He heard her come around the corner. He kept working. She sat on the stone bench along the garden wall. She did not speak first. After a while, she said, "She never met me." He said, "No." She said, "How did she know?" He kept his hands on the casing for a moment. Then he stopped working. He said, "She knew Thomas. She knew the kind of person he would have spent his life with." He looked at her. She also knew the kind of person who would have spent 4 years building something he started instead of letting it become a monument to herself. Lena looked at the garden. The late November light was thin and gold. She said, "What did she ask you to do after? After the documents? After the board? What did she say about after?" He said, "She told me to come here and do good work. She told me to pay attention." He set the rag down on the sill. "She told me that whatever came after was mine to figure out." The garden was quiet. The estate stretched out around them, 300 acres of Virginia horse country, going amber in the afternoon. She said, "Are you staying?" He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "The east wing's finished, but the north porch has a sill problem that's been ignored for probably 15 years, and the spring house down the hill has a roof that won't last another winter." She said, "That's not what I asked." He said, "No, it isn't." A pause. He said, "Yes." She nodded once. She looked at the garden. He picked up the rag and went back to the casing. After a while, Ivy came around the corner in her red coat, home from school, with the composition notebook under her arm. She stopped when she saw them both. She looked at her mother, she looked at Declan, she looked at the garden. She opened the notebook to a new page and sat down on the end of the bench and began to draw. She drew the way she always drew. The house, the tree, 3 figures standing close. She did not label them. She did not need to. The afternoon light came down through the bare trees and fell across the page, and the estate went on around them, in the particular stillness of a place that has been waiting a long time to hold something it was built to hold.